The Arkham series flawlessly defined what it means to be Batman in video games. But long before the revolutionary free-flow combat system dominated the industry, The Dark Knight was already trying to translate the weight of his legendary animated series into the 3D universe. While the world rediscovers the charm of Lego bricks in Lego Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight, we need to look back at where serious 3D actually began. The question is this forgotten PS2 classic a misunderstood masterpiece or a frustrating nightmare? In the world we live in today, the standard for superhero video games is incredibly high. We have monumental titles like the Arkham franchise, which is widely worshipped, has created a devout fanbase, and forever changed how we explore Gotham City. On the other side of the spectrum, even lighter approaches, like the beloved Lego Batman series, deliver cooperative experiences that border on perfection within their own scope. We are incredibly spoiled nowadays. But when we fire up the time machine and look back at the past, the story is completely different. We find a wild jungle of games that are good, bad, and highly questionable. It is impossible to talk about the Caped Crusader in the 90s and early 2000s without mentioning Batman the Animated Series. This production wasn't just a Saturday morning cartoon. It was a cultural event that spawned a legion of adult and child fans alike, redefining the hero's entire aesthetic. And as expected, such a distinct product would inevitably spawn dozens of video game adaptations trying to capitalize on that smash success. Since the 16-bit era on the Super Nintendos of the world, we already had games based on this animation, but the real leap of faith happened during the PlayStation 2 generation.
The release of Batman Vengeance occurred in a very peculiar year for the Bat, 2001. Think about the landscape back then. We were still years away from seeing Christopher Nolan's acclaimed The Dark Knight trilogy come to life. To make matters worse, the character's image in theaters was completely tarnished by the critical and commercial failure of Batman and Robin. The Bat desperately needed a breather, a victory outside the comic book pages. What completely dominated the hero's image in the public imagination was the new Batman adventures. And that is exactly where Ubisoft Montreal saw the perfect opportunity.
Ubisoft took on the massive responsibility of producing Batman Vengeance. Released for a wide variety of platforms, including Xbox, PlayStation 2, Nintendo GameCube, PC, and even getting its own version for the Game Boy Advance, the game promised a technological miracle, taking everything we loved about the 2D animation and translating it perfectly into a three-dimensional environment, truly putting the player in the shoes of Gotham's hero. The big question that hovers over this title to this day is, did it manage to honor Batman during this uncertain period? The answer, my friends, is a painful yes and no. The most absolute and unquestionable positive of this game is its ability to throw you right into a grand adventure from the animated series. The respect for the source material is remarkable, especially in the audio department. Ubisoft managed the feat of gathering the series' original voice cast. We are talking about untouchable legends. The late Kevin Conroy as Batman, the brilliant Mark Hamill as the Joker, and Arlene Sorkin delivering her iconic Harley Quinn. Having these voice-acting giants deliver their lines creates instant immersion, but the game's visuals still cause a bit of awkwardness for some purist fans. Of course, due to the limitations of the early 2000s, the 3D aesthetic doesn't have the same refinement as the first season of the animated series. The look closely follows the style of the new Batman adventures, with characters featuring more angular lines and colder colors. Despite this technical difference and the PS2's dated polygons, the game masterfully emulates the noir, suffocating, and dangerous atmosphere that defines Gotham City. With the visuals and the original actors in hand, the eternal debate always pops up on internet forums. Does Batman Vengeance actually belong to the animated series canon?
The official answer regarding canon is hazy. While there is no official DC stamp confirming the chronology, the aesthetic and the cast make it impossible not to view it as part of that universe. It's worth keeping an important heads up in mind. Bruce Timm and Paul Dini, the masters behind the cartoon, had absolutely no involvement in this Ubisoft production. The absence of Bruce Timm and Paul Dini means the script was developed from scratch by Ubisoft Montreal's own team.
As a bit of behind-the-scenes trivia, the writer responsible for this narrative was the very same one who, a few years later, would adapt the script for the Batman Begins movie tie-in game. It's a production made entirely apart from the television show's creative control, but it still brilliantly manages to put you in the shoes of this specific iteration of Batman. Speaking of the script, the narrative of Vengeance starts off simple, but quickly escalates into one of the most tense situations of the hero's career. The plot kicks off in a very traditional fashion. Batman, in his role as a nightly vigilante patrolling the skies of Gotham, stumbles upon what looks like a simple kidnapping and ends up saving a woman in peril named Mary. However, upon conducting his usual investigations back in the Batcave, he discovers that this isolated event was actually just the tip of the iceberg of a meticulous plan orchestrated by the Joker. The initial confrontation with the Clown Prince of Crime triggers a bizarre and shocking twist just a few hours into the campaign. When the Caped Crusader finally corners and faces the Joker, something unthinkable happens. The clown ends up falling to his apparent death. This turn of events sounds fishy to Batman from the very first second. With Gotham's underworld king out of the picture, a massive power vacuum opens up, and the city's criminals plunge into a bloody war to try and seize the spot as the ultimate boss of the criminal underworld. In the midst of this escalating crime wave, the situation spins completely out of control, and Batman himself becomes a target of the Gotham City authorities.
The conspiracy reaches its peak when Batman is falsely framed for a direct attack on Commissioner Gordon. From that moment on, he loses his primary ally on the force and becomes a fugitive, hunted by the very officers he used to help. Forced to work from the shadows, the player must unravel who is orchestrating this chaos, while crossing paths with formidable villains like Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy. The investigation culminates in an ending that many could see coming, but it's executed with a mastery worthy of the original animated series. In the game's final act, Batman footprints the truth. The Joker wasn't dead at all. It was all a smokescreen, a massive theatrical show created by him to distract the hero while he coordinated a destructive crime wave across the entire city. The Joker resurfaces as the ultimate final boss of the game, forcing you to use everything you've learned to defeat your archenemy and save Gotham. It's undeniable that the story is extremely competent. However, it's when you actually take the controller into your hands that the division begins to show. We have arrived at the ultimate Achilles heel of Batman Vengeance. Its gameplay. If the game felt like a dream up to this point, in practice it can be a deeply frustrating experience. The developers' intentions were ambitious, to bring all the tactical interactivity that Batman demands, placing his famous utility belt at the player's disposal with a complete arsenal of gadgets. The variety of weapons is impressive. You have standard batarangs, flashbangs, capture nets, bat grapples, and even powerful electrified batarangs. Analyzing these old games takes an absurd amount of work, but we do it because we know that you, as a fan of the Bat, value this historical preservation. So if you're enjoying this dive into the past, smash that like button and subscribe. Here at Comic Chronicles, we don't just play, we study the mythology of Gotham every single day. It costs you nothing and helps our channel keep growing tremendously.
Having all these options in your inventory is great on paper. The game also encourages vertical movement. There are several moments where you will need to use the iconic grappling gun to fire lines and swing between gargoyles and buildings, an essential traversal mechanic for the hero that we would eventually see perfected brilliantly years later, starting from the very first game in the Arkham series. The problem isn't with what you can use, but rather with how you are forced to use this equipment during the heat of battle. Translating all these gadgets to the PS2 controller buttons can become incredibly limiting. The game forces you to alternate between two distinct camera modes. Hand-to-hand combat happens in third person, while using equipment, like aiming a batarang, requires you to abruptly switch to a first-person point of view. The clunky transition between these two modes completely destroys the rhythm of the action. The regular third-person combat doesn't help much either. It tries to feel choreographed, but it ends up being a slow, bureaucratic exchange of punches. You basically perform simple strike combos and a few basic takedowns to drop enemies. Granted, making direct comparisons to Rocksteady's free-flow system isn't exactly fair, since that industry gold standard wouldn't emerge until many years later.
However, even when evaluating Vengeance within the context of its era, the Bat's movement in street fights leaves a lot to be desired. If we want to be fair, we can look at another game by Ubisoft from around the same time that handled combat much better.
Rise of Sin Tzu, despite having its own structural flaws, featured beat-em-up combat that was way more satisfying, dynamic, and responsive than what we see here. I promise I'll cover Sin Tzu here on the channel very soon. And if you, like me, love Batman games, but prefer an experience that is a bit less stressful than this PS2 one, the new LEGO Batman is right there to prove the Dark Knight also knows how to be fun and lighthearted. In fact, if you want to grab your copy or complete your DC brick collection, check out our YouTube shopping shelf right below, or through the official Amazon link in the description and the pinned comment. I've curated the best LEGO sets and current games with exclusive prices for the channel's subscribers. It's the absolute best way for you to support Comic Chronicles and bring an epic item home. The issue with Vengeance is that this clunky combat isn't even the worst part of the game. The true despair sets in during first-person view, in the godforsaken boss battles of the campaign. Trying to aim and use heavy equipment against agile enemies like Mr. Freeze or Poison Ivy is an absolute test of sanity.
The first-person aiming mechanic is slow and completely user-unfriendly. But wait, Ubisoft saved yet another stressful surprise for encounters with ordinary thugs. In this game, simply throwing a couple of punches and knocking an enemy down isn't enough. When you drop a criminal, you have to run over and cuff them. If you ignore this step and try to move forward in the level, get ready for the respawn. The enemy will magically get back up after a while and come back to haunt you from behind. The game demands you be methodical with your arrests. If you get lost exploring a stage, these constantly reviving enemies become an ongoing headache. To make matters worse, in an almost sadistic fashion, your handcuffs are limited by your inventory. There aren't enough cuffs to mindlessly lock up everyone on the map, which forces the player into a careful strategy of who to take down and who to avoid, lest you run completely out of resources. And if managing handcuffs sounds annoying, the true invisible archenemy of this game is called the fixed camera. The movement tied to the camera angles is dreadful. Across multiple stages, the angles become stiff, and you find yourself struggling just to walk in a straight line or figure out how to cross from one rooftop to another. Sometimes Batman simply gets stuck on the ledge, with the game failing to make it clear if the angle allows for a grappling gun shot or if your only choice is a blind leap into the dark. When your only way out is using the cape to glide, the locked camera turns into an unwanted enemy that causes frequent accidental deaths. This visual exhaustion from the level design inevitably brings us to the vehicular missions, which are always a highly relevant part of the Bat's mythology. Ubisoft included specific stages where you control the Batmobile on the streets and the Batwing in the skies. The chase sequence using Batman's signature ride features horrendous controls, turning driving into a frustrating and heavily punishing experience. The Batwing at least offers some comic relief amidst the chaos, especially during the chaotic aerial mission involving Mr. Freeze's territory.
Even though the aerial mission is a visual frenzy where it's hard to tell what's an obstacle and what's just part of the background, the Batwing ends up being much more manageable and smoother than the slippery streets with the Batmobile. But all of these mechanical flaws, from the camera to the vehicles, run straight into the most unforgiving issue of Batman Vengeance by today's standards: the complete and total absence of generous autosaves during progression. Modern players, used to games saving every time they open a door, are going to experience a massive reality check here. A single misstep, like missing a jump between buildings because of a crooked camera angle, means all your progress is gone, and there is no recent checkpoint to bail you out. The finest example of developer sadism is the infamous sewer level. The sewer stage is an absolute joke. It is incredibly long, repetitive, packed with deadly traps, and severely lacking in save points. To try and alleviate the stress of combat and blind jumps, the game also incorporates some puzzle-solving elements into the mission structures. At various points, the game's pacing slows down, requiring you to solve logic puzzles using power cubes to activate generators, unlock security doors, and open access to hidden areas of the map.
It's a necessary breathing room that adds some welcome diversity to the gameplay. Beyond the puzzles, the gameplay offers rewards for those who dare to fight better through the power move system. As you defeat enemies and rack up points, the game allows you to trade that score for upgrades and special attacks, known as power moves. Among the abilities you can purchase, the most interesting one ties directly into the game's stealth mechanics. The stealth here is incredibly basic. The game features a brief tutorial where you learn to hug walls to slip past lasers and alarms in hallways unnoticed, but with power moves enabled, Batman can literally turn invisible for a few seconds to ambush armed guards from behind.
This invisibility skill directly mirrors the famous optical camouflage used by Solid Snake in Metal Gear Solid, and it's one of the most creative touches of the gameplay. And as much as this entire 3D package has visually aged, we have to be fair to the animations. The cutscenes keep the dramatic tension high, thanks to the stellar voice cast and an art direction that genuinely understands the source material. Watching this story unfold remains incredibly cool. It's worth noting that the graphical experience you get depends entirely on which console you had at home back then. The PlayStation 2 was the baseline hardware for our analysis, but it was technically inferior in certain aspects. The versions developed for the Nintendo GameCube and the classic Xbox ran noticeably better, boasting higher resolution textures and more stable frame rates. There was also a version released for the Game Boy Advance, which completely altered the aesthetic and returned to a 2D side-scrolling style, moving away from the home console project design. When we piece all these technical and narrative fragments together, we arrive at the inevitable question: where exactly does Batman Vengeance fit in history? Some friends often suggest that this game serves as a sort of pre-Arkham, especially because it was the project that reunited the voice actors who would later shine in Rocksteady's masterpiece. Personally, I prefer to see it as a neat piece of trivia, but Vengeance wasn't designed with that same systemic genius. At the end of the day, it's a mediocre game. It's the translation of an excellent TV episode wrapped in dated, frustrating gameplay that will get on your nerves. It's a game that will demand a ton of patience, but it rewards hardcore fans with a pure aura of nostalgia. Batman Vengeance might have its flaws, but it paved the way for everything we love today. And if you want to keep this journey through the hero's console history going, I've put together a complete playlist of Batman games that is popping up right now in the card and on the end screen. There, we'll talk about the old retro games, the new LEGO Batman Legacy of the Dark Knight, and even the secrets of the Arkham franchise. Click right there and let's keep this conversation about the evolution of Gotham in video games going. Big hug and see you in the next video.